record on this.
So just to note, this meeting is being recorded.
Yes, it's being recorded and we're live. So just to set the stage a little bit, this is the Open Source Security Foundation Vulnerability Disclosures meeting. Today is September 14th, 2020. And I think we can get started. So let me pull up the agenda really quickly and share my screen. So we have a pretty busy agenda today, which is actually quite awesome. And there were a number of people reaching out to me to either be included in the calendar invite or join the working group. I think those two things are not necessarily the same. So the working group meetings are open to everybody. The link to this Zoom meeting is in the OpenSSF community calendar. So actually, anyone who wants can join that, and people who can't join can follow us on YouTube later on. But there were actually quite a few people who expressed interest in becoming active members of this working group. So folks, if you could maybe tell us a little bit about yourselves and what's your interest in the working group. Marcus, maybe we can start with you. Welcome to the working group, by the way.
Thank you. So I'm working for SUSE as project manager for the reactive security, or that's what we call security incident response. And of course, that also entails that we are very much interested in automation of sharing of vulnerabilities and how to process this on a more automated level than it is currently done. So that's the main reason that I'm participating here, to look at how to better interact with the rest of the community.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the originally use cases that we've identified, how to make this vulnerability information flow between the parties in some interoperable way. Okay, thank you, welcome. Eduardo.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Cool. So I'm Eduardo. I work for Canonical, mainly working on Ubuntu with community. I've been working with security for the past 5 years, probably. And yeah, we just want to be part of it, see if we can find any standards that the whole industry can use and try to make things better.
Okay, welcome. And thanks for the introduction. Remus, I don't think I've seen him on the list of attendees. Okay, so I don't think he's here, so we can postpone the warm welcome to the next meeting. And Paolo.
Hello, I'm also from Canonical, same as Eduardo. I'm the security team inside Canonical, so we try to make Ubuntu and Linux overall more safe. So that's the reason I'm here.
Okay, welcome. So we have a very strong Canonical representation, which is great. And maybe let's move. Is there anyone else who's new to this meeting and working group and would like to introduce themselves? David, I don't think we had the pleasure of hosting you before.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think I know some of you anyway, but I am new to this group. So David A. Wheeler, I work for the Linux Foundation. That's actually new as of April. My official title here is Open Source Supply Chain Security. So basically, I'm around to try to help open source software be more secure. Obviously, vulnerability disclosure is part of that. Our goal is to reduce the need for it, but since that's never going to go away, let's try to make it better when we need to do it.
Okay. Well, one could hope, but it's still we're still going to be necessary. I think.
Yes.
I think going forward. I think I saw one more new face, Anne. I think it's your first time with us.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ann Bertuccio. I run the security program at Google's open source office, and I was just curious what y'all were up to, so just gonna listen.
Okay, I hope it's going to be an interesting session. So thanks for joining. The last time around, one of the things we chatted about was were a few topics around governance. I have not made as much progress on those things as I would have liked, but we made progress on one thing, and I was looking for some brave souls to help out to run this group, and I was like secretly hoping that at least one person would actually respond, and I was lucky enough to have more than one people actually reach out and express interest in helping out running those meetings and moving our agenda forward. So starting, I think, today, Chris and Matthew are going to be helping me run those meetings, and we'll help out in making sure we have a proper charter and we have well-defined goals, and we can actually move forward on those. So thank you guys for stepping up. That's I really appreciate this. And one other thing that I wanted to bring to your attention here is that at the very beginning, the OpenSSF, after it formed, like it wasn't quite clear like what's our stance towards Slack. I know a lot of online communities can use Slack to collaborate in more real time than what GitHub allows for. And we now do have an open source security Foundation Slack workspace. There is it's not a very lively place yet, but I think if more people join, then it could be, and it definitely will allow us to like a more real time communication medium. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post this invite link in the meeting notes. But if you would like to get it any other way, feel free to ping me over email or ask a question in GitHub issues or GitHub discussions. I'll keep an eye on all of those, and we'll be happy to share the link. We have a chance. Yeah.
Yeah, just a real quick note on the Slack for OpenSSF. This is the version that we have. Messages disappear after 10,000 messages, so don't put anything here that you need to have a historical record of. This is more for immediate, quick discussion, informal discussions.
Right. I would assume that everything that we need to keep track of is best tracked on GitHub. I think that's a better medium. But I know a lot of people want to shoot an occasional message here and there, and I think it's just getting more popular than email these days. And if it turns out to be a lively community, that's fine. So whoever wants to get in, just give me a shout and I'll advertise that anyways. Alrighty, in our last two meetings, we were looking at disclosure practices in two different communities. One of them was the Node.js ecosystem and the related bug bounty program on HackerOne. And in the last meeting, Reid was telling us more about disclosure in the Ruby community with RubyGems and the RubySec project. And today we actually will venture into a little bit of a different territory, and that territory is Linux distribution. So Morten and Chris have actually agreed to tell us a little bit more about how Arch Linux and Red Hat handle vulnerability disclosures. So Morten, feel free to, I don't know if you want to just talk or do you want to present something?
Yo.
That's completely up to you. I'll stop sharing.
Yes, can you hear me? Oh,
yes.
Can you hear me? Oh, awesome.
Yes.
So this is a little bit exciting. I tried the share screen feature through the web browser today because I'm using Linux and Zoom, and I'm not sure exactly how well it works. So we'll just try. Can you see a screen? Does it work?
No problems.
Oh, awesome. So yes, the last time we sort of looked at how Ruby does their security vulnerability recording. They sort of use this YAML structured data approach. I know Debian does the same, and as well as Alpine Linux. What we sort of opted in Arch Linux was to write our own sort of web dashboard, which is tightly integrated into the ecosystem. So here we can essentially record vulnerability groups, which are essentially a listing of the package in Arch, the CV number, the affected version, and some references. And this allows us to easily sort of track the security issues. We can also then add the CV details with the severity, remote, local, and some listing of the types. We also try to keep the references handy. And from here, we can sort of easily do the generation of the email, which is sent to the advisory listing of Arch. So sort of what this allows us to do is to keep track of the bumped packages, which is our to-do lists, if there's any issues that needs to be sorted, and everything. This doesn't track embargoed private CV issues. Everything is public. All of this also has a full REST API, which allows us to sort of provide some tooling to the community. We also have a complete audit log of everything that happens. So we know who added stuff, who did different changes. And this has been running since 2016, I think, and we have published around 878 advisories on this platform. So this sort of works well for us. Compared to other sort of, I assume C-Rob is going to talk more about Red Hat, but we're all volunteers, so there's sort of loosely based organization around how we work on this tracker. But it sort of works well. The thing that we sort of are interested in is more easier machine digestible data from Mitra or other providers that allows us to easily not have to like discover security issues on the OSS security mailing list, or how to watch the Ubuntu advisory listings for new issues, because we simply don't have the capacity to stay on top of the published data formats that Mitra does. So yeah, that's a quick rundown. A lot of the things you see here in terms of the descriptions, the patches and stuff is mostly like based on what Red Hat does and what Debian does, because they're the sort of the ones with open bug trackers, easy to find information, and usually well written. So there's not a huge, there's not often that we sort of have to write our own CV descriptions or have to figure it a lot of on our own. We just sort of struggle to find upstream patches and what's sort of tie the patches together with the CV numbers. Yes, any questions? Was it clear?
It was clear. I have a question.
Yes.
You know, what would you're saying you can't stay on top of the public formats? Is that because of databases like NVD don't do a reasonable job of identifying the packages, or is there some other problem that you're having?
So I think it's a combination of both. I'm not sure what NVD does to publish, but Mitra publishes like an XML dump of the newly entered IDs, and you have to manually go through them to figure out which one is the reserved CVs, which has now been updated. You have to like manually process them. You could probably do the Git repo with the JSON data, but then you have to sort of parse Git commit logs to sort of figure out what was recently added. There's also this problem of like Debian likes to split up packages. So you have the library headers, the documentation, everything is separate packages, and you don't really know which packages across distributions, which is not a problem when you're sort of looking at the sort of lack of metadata which is present in the upstream CV databases.
I'm just trying to figure out what data you're missing. You know, what would change to make this super easy?
I think more metadata upstream, easier to parse maybe, but better APIs I think is the main issue. Mitra only publishes the XML dumps, but they're hard to parse. There's not one source with all the metadata. It's all sort of spread across different repositories, and sometimes the metadata which are published from Red Hat or Canonical is not entered into the Mitra, so you sort of like have to scavenge a little bit across the different advisory systems to find everything you're looking for.
So do you know how this information is consumed by other parties? Or that's probably like an interesting question, because there seems to be tons of data here and a lot of work in like integrating this information from a couple of different sources. So I'm super interested in how people are actually using it.
So I can just quickly show the so everything on the security tracker. If you go visit it, you can just like append JSON to the URL, and you should usually have some structured data back. So I think the most usage from this is because Arch isn't an enterprise distribution, so it's usually hobbyist people that use it. So I think most of the information people get is from the secured advisory mailing list, and secondary, it's the there's someone wrote a package tooling which basically lists your packages, which ones are outdated and which one has registered security vulnerabilities. I think that's the two ways people consume these logs. I know that the LVN newspaper scrapes our mailing lists and republishes our security advisories, which they do with several security distributions. But I'm not sort of very familiar with how, if there's any enterprise people that sort of uses Arch in production and parses our data. I'm not familiar with them because we haven't heard from them.
Cool, thank you. So just to so I have like a clear picture. So
yep.
This information only goes one way. So you grab it upstream to make it available to whoever is using Arch Linux. You're not doing like disclosure yes. for things that either Arch Linux developers kind of discover and maybe patch themselves, and port the patches upstream and make sure that those are properly disclosed to, you know, NPD or other vulnerability databases upstream.
So yes, so we have done that, but that's usually from the Mitra web form. We have been contemplating applying to be a CNA, but we don't compared to other distributions that does backporting of patches and stuff, we stay pretty close to upstream. So there isn't like a usual huge amount of issues we need to handle as security issues. It's usually like the occasional Pacman bug. And recently the file system package had the CVE, I think, but that's 1 or 2 a year usually. So you can easily handle them with the Mitra CVE form.
Okay, cool. You anticipated my question about the CNA, so thanks for answering that without me asking.
So yes.
Cool. So all the people on the call, feel free to ask Morten questions, I think.
Yeah, I have one question.
Sure.
The severity that you're using is just CVSS, or you have your own for the distro?
We never added the CVSS score because it's easier just to have enum. But currently, we look at NVD. We sort of always like to defer to Red Hat because we have a better experience with what they're reporting than whatever NVD is reporting. So we usually look at the CVSS score from NVD/Mitra, and then also Red Hat, and just like, what do we think here? Is it a remote? Is it a local DOS problem, not critical severity? And just do a little bit of eyeballing based on the CVSS from Red Hat and NVD. So they're not based on CVSS currently.
Thank you.
For the affected versions, do you ever work with ranges, or is it usually a single version?
We currently only do single versions. I don't think we have a use for ranges because we usually patch it, or there's a point release, and we don't have multiple releases at the same time. So there's not support for ranges, and I don't think it's that useful for us. I know some descriptions include it, so it's sometimes easier.
Yeah, my question was mostly if something was vulnerable, not in the latest version, would that be shown somehow? So if it was identified that, let's say, the last 2 versions were affected.
Okay, yes. So we would usually take the what do we do? So we use if we had already published the package, we usually just go with the one that's published and to that one that's fixed. If it's original discovered 1 version ago, it's already published, so we don't necessarily care that much about it because we work on the basis that once a security issue has been patched or been out for 2 weeks, we don't usually publish an advisory on it. Also to try to keep our the workload sort of bearable if we miss stuff. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, okay, thank you. Is there more questions, or should we move on to Red Hat?
Going once, going twice. Okay, I think that means no more questions. I think if you want to ask questions later on, if something pops into your head that you didn't think about during the meeting, which it often does for me, just feel free to open up an issue on GitHub, and I think that's a good way to continue the discussion. Alrighty.
Thank you. I hope that was insightful in some way.
Yes, it definitely was for me. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Okay.
No problem.
Yeah. Chris, do you want to take this over?
I would love to. Thank you very much for sharing. That was very interesting. We'll see if I can meet that awesome quality content if I can share my amazing screen here. Everybody see my pleasingly black and white screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. So I'm Krob. I am the program architect for Red Hat Product Security. We've been a product security and incident response team for nearly 25 years, starting off with Linux and then migrating to a portfolio that encompasses over 50 different open source based solutions. First and foremost, throughout our history and especially more so today, we follow a principle called CVD, which is Coordinated Vulnerability Disclosure. So what that means for us is if we are brought in and given information about a security issue, we always respect what the finder's wishes are and how they want that shared, or kind of where or how that can be talked about. If we're aware of implications within other, so for example, We work a lot with our partners over at SUSE and Canonical. So if we're aware, if somebody reports an issue to us that we are aware, we know it potentially affects the other distributions, we will reach out and ask the reporter, we're aware that X, Y, and Z could affect my friends. Can we please get those folks looped in? But it's always ultimately up to the finder what they decide and how they want to share this information. We were actually one of the organizations that helped write the Coordinated Vulnerability Disclosure Guidelines with FIRST. I'll put links into the notes when we're all done. But this is a series of practices around how to handle that information and how to work with other externalized parties. My team monitors over 400,000 packages and versions of packages and projects around the internet. It's quite a lot of work. We keep that in a database, a manifest database. So we were able to say, as we get information about a particular problem, we can tell precisely which version of a product or which component within a product potentially shipped that information. And then we're able to do further analysis. Every issue that we have that's reported to us is reviewed by a Red Hat engineer on our security team. We have close to 100 individuals around the globe. We're in 17 countries, and they are experts in our different products within the portfolio and open source and Linux in general. And they go through and they verify, does this issue work within the context of Red Hat engineering? One of the benefits a commercial distribution has over community is that we have a large investment in a testing suite and a whole battery of things like source code scanning, these other tools that community projects might not have. So we'll go through, and we also, as we build our offering, we have certain compiler options, certain settings we know that on or off as that offering is released. So we understand the problem within the context of Red Hat, and then we will work with our internal engineering teams to get that patch worked out. We have a couple different models on how we find out information. Predominantly, our modus operandi is if we have packages or projects that are important to our customers, we try to ensure we have engineers that are contributors to those projects or potentially earn their way up to like a level of a maintainer. And we also work to potentially work as either a participant in an upstream security team, or in a lot of cases, we actually act as the upstream security team because those smaller projects might not have the expertise or ability to do this stuff. But basically, we are either directly told by a finder, hey, I found this problem with X or Y, we'd like you to fix it, or through our engagements with the upstream community, whether we are the security team or we're participants, we get this information. We're also members of a lot of different mailing lists where we get information, intelligence about things that are going on. And then we've developed, pardon my children, it's school from home today, so I guess they decided they wanted to print out something. I'll mute just for 1 second here. If I can find the mute button. I bet I can't. Oh, well. I'll instruct them to stop when they walk in. We have developed a series of tools to monitor those 400,000 packages and versions. We call it Assembler internally, where it's basically scraping the internet, where we're monitoring things that are important to our products. As an organization, we are a CNA, and we offer CVE services to smaller projects. If they don't have that ability or mechanism, we assist with upstream groups writing security advisories. We help them analyze issues if need be. We also are very heavily involved in the industry communities, whether that is FIRST or in the other large ISACA, these large industry groups. So we are constantly talking with our security peers around the globe. That's another source of intelligence for us. And then we will have people either randomly report something, or they will potentially submit a paper to a important conference like Black Hat or DevCon, where we're monitoring those conference sites to see what types of things are being submitted, and if they hit certain characteristics, like they They say it's an exploit of the Linux kernel, or they're going to zero Kubernetes. We'll take additional information to kind of research what's going on and take any preparatory steps we can for those types of things. We never knowingly push silent fixes. I know that is a great practice some people in the upstream have decided to adopt, which we are completely against. We feel that as an issue is discovered, it should be shared with those people that have a responsibility or ability to fix it, and users that potentially could be impacted by that issue should be informed whether or not there's a fix, but they should be told you are potentially at risk because of this vulnerability or exploit. But we, as a corporate entity, will not knowingly push silent fixes, and that's a conversation piece we have with several of larger upstreams about some of their newer practices.
Hey, Chris, that's really
Yep.
concerning to me. Who's doing that?
Who's doing what?
Like silent fixes. That's not cool, man. Like
I will not call out anybody in particular. If you're doing it, you know who you are. You should stop doing that. Silently fixing something is terrible. It is disingenuous to your end consumer.
David, we should talk later maybe about this, because we should definitely be calling out any open source project that does that.
Yeah. I actually agree with you, but as Grob has already noted, there are several projects. I suspect, although I think they might not agree with the characterization, the Linux kernel might be characterized that way. So there's one that apparently some people hear of.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they would say sometimes we fix stuff and we don't realize we fix a security vulnerability, but which is a different thing, to be fair.
It's important for us, for customers, to understand what their risks are and understand where there are vulnerabilities. And ideally, for things that are under our stewardship or care, we try to provide as much information that the customer can have a mitigation or how to turn the thing off or avoid using this, or ideally provide a patch. But yeah, there's some debate upstream about what is or is not a security issue and what needs documentation. That's philosophy for later.
Yeah, let me attempt to channel Greg KH, although really you ought to hear from his mouth instead of me. But I think from the Linux kernel's point of view, they believe the correct way is upgrade to the latest kernel. And anything that, backporting patches and so on, well, I mean, we released the thing as a whole. We didn't test all these specific things backpatch. So they would much rather distros quickly package up the latest. I realize this is a discussion that you guys have been having for years. So let me step away from that one.
To counter Greg's position, I will provide as evidence millions of end consumers that's not how they use Linux.
Yeah, actually, he's painfully aware of that one, to be fair. And his proposed solution is, well, let's get upstreams moving, let's get downstreams moving faster. So,
well, when you're a great organization like us that has a 10 to 15 year tail on support on some of our offerings, that is not necessarily an option. That's part of the value that commercial Linux offers, as opposed to going upstream. Helps you buffer from some of the changes or regressions that might happen up there. But that's a future conversation. But again, we don't knowingly push silent fixes. How we do all this is once we discover an issue that affects our products, or even if there's a report, we have internal tooling that we've developed that grabs this information, and then we start to create defect trackers. Historically, our system had been Bugzilla. So about half of our portfolio uses Bugzilla as a public Bugzilla. You can go open up a bug, and if you mark that it has security implications, it'll mark that bug temporarily private as you interact with us in engineering to determine what is or is not the problem. And then if you're the finder, you can opt to go public if you desire, or you can work till we have work with upstream to get a fix. But we have defect tracking systems, primarily Bugzilla. We also use public Jira, and we use GitHub and GitLab issues, depending on which of the awesome products you're working with. I'll again post some links there, but bugzilla.redhat.com is one of the public places where you can go look at what types of things, whether it's not all security issues. A lot of times it's RFEs, or customers will find normal bugs that don't have security implications, but it's all in there. All of the data that we collect, or all the issues we work with, we publish publicly. We have a metrics page that is a way to get it, but we also publish all of our data as OVAL, CVRF, CSAF. We have a vulnerability data API that this stuff is available in machine readable formats. And so because our software is sourced and upstream open source, I can't hide anything. So again, everything in my world, once it's public, it is completely viewable to the world. We have an internal tool that watches upstream, and then we developed an internal workflow tool that helps stitch those different back-end systems. So again, we have about 4 different defect trackers. We also have several different internal build pipelines or errata systems that we need to issue trackers to, and we kind of manage all that through a central pane of glass we call SFM2, a Security Flaw Manager 2. We're very original in our names. We publish all of our updates publicly. I'll show you kind of an example. We have on our customer portal, we have our CVE page where we provide every CVE that affects a Red Hat component. We will issue a CVSS score, ideally latest and greatest. Right now we're on 3.1. We're helping develop CVSS v4 with the working group. We also provide a CWE analysis. What was the coding flaw from which this vulnerability originated? And then we will provide a Red Hat severity score. And this is our method to help teach people when there is something that needs to have quicker action. So we all know CVSS is a system to describe how a vulnerability works. It is not a measurement of risk, but unfortunately, most people have adopted it as a risk management tool, which it is not. So we provide the Red Hat severity score to help coach customers. This is something, if we have a critical update, we have very objective criteria of how something is critical or how something is important. We have that all documented publicly on our page. And if something is critical, that's something that we actually take extra steps to go out and tell people. Even though this might have a CVSS score of like a 5.6, it might not appear to be interesting. Red Hat feels, based off of how it's deployed and used, this is something that needs faster action, or something that potentially needs, can be waited for a standard patch cycle, for example. But that's something that we provide with everybody. I heard someone mention MITRE. As we all know, the NVD is the best thing ever. And they are always up to date and accurate. Well, for this particular CVE 15802, we have issued our CVSS score. This is our analysis of the issue in the context of Red Hat. And as soon as NVD updates their database, we will provide that information publicly, show them side by side how NVD analyzed it versus us. And we also developed a program where we are collaborating with MITRE that if we notice a big discrepancy, either higher or lower, we're providing them our analysis and suggesting they might want to modify the score and off of what our experts have done. And we've done about a 95% success ratio in working with NVD to get the scores adjusted as kind of an expert in Linux and open source views it. We also mentioned when we looked at Arch Linux about what was affected. So we have our support life cycles all publicly published, and on our CVE page will tell you which products were affected, which package, if it was affected or not. So for example, RHEL 5, this particular kernel issue was not infected, probably because it was a newer feature than that older kernel was. You'll see here with Enterprise MRG2, that is affected, but it is out of support scope. So that is no longer a supported product for customers. They'll need to take some additional actions around that. There's our security data. I'll get links to all this when I'm done. Let me see. All of our advisories have a CVE identifier. We use CVSS to describe how the vulnerability works. We do CWE to describe how that issue, the coding flaw behind that issue. And we're evaluating in the future using SSVC, which is a new technique promoted by CertCC, Art Mannion and company, where it hopefully, if a customer does their due diligence, will provide a more accurate risk assessment for them. And as a supplier of fixes, we would state, are we affected? Are we aware of active exploit? And what does engineering, what's their position? Are they going to decide to fix this issue or not? And end consumers would take that SSVC information and plug that into their own system and decide how critical their system is, what kind of data and stuff live there. So that is the long and the short of it. What questions did that generate for everybody?
Quick question, SSVC, that's the stakeholder specific vulnerability categorization?
Correct.
Thanks.
I actually have a question. So it seems, as you said, it's been going on for years and very mature. Like, what are your pain points? Without maybe pointing fingers at specific, industry groups. Like for you as an organization, working with, as you said, like a number of, industry peers and like tons of upstream software, I imagine, also with some security researchers, bug bounty programs, things of that nature. Like what's the biggest problem for you today?
Our biggest pain point is really more internal, is working with our lines of business and our engineering teams, kind of helping describe the severity of an issue and coaching them to do the right thing by our customers and fix something or produce some type of workaround for them. Like I mentioned, we have generally a 10 to 15 year tail on support. So we carry a lot of technical debt. So as we get into, you mentioned how agile upstream can be, where you just install the brand new kernel. I have customers that run the world, every trading house, every bank, every government, every military organization on the planet does not run on the brand new version of kernel. Fun fact. So they cannot deploy a brand new thing that potentially is going to break ABI or API compatibility. They have developed their critical business system around this specific set of functionality. So it's up to our engineers to kind of figure out how to make the fix relevant on these older things. So that's really kind of our biggest problem. Interacting with upstream is generally not too bad. We have some upstreams that are a little more aggressive than others, that they're going to save the world with their new and amazing idea, which they do have a lot of great ideas, but after a few years, all this stuff tends to kind of operate pretty similarly because they start to accept there's some really good practice out there in open source, and they start to adopt how other projects might be tracking things or doing things. But yes, so upstream and like researchers really don't bug us. We love working with researchers. Printer. We occasionally get to the great opportunity to work with, issues that affect every computer on the globe, and those are pretty awesome. Marcus is well aware of some of these things, and when you get to that point where you have an external party controlling the embargo, and when it's the scope of things is so large, unfortunately, the embargo time and the amount of people you have to include in the embargo, the time grows, the amount of people you have to get included in it grows. But our typical embargo time, things that we see that are private for a period of time, is about 10 to 13 days. And that's really less than 15% of all the vulnerabilities we fix every year. And every year we fix about 1,400 CVEs. So about 15% of those are embargoed for some period of time. And it's just the really stupid, huge ones that are very cumberplex to deal with. That's where I got to meet Greg KH and Linus and everybody on those things.
The reason I asked this question is that like previously we have identified as one of the pain points we would potentially like to address in this workgroup that there's it's quite hard to like publish vulnerability information that are easily consumable by both other organizations, but also tools such as vulnerability scanners, and also like one of the use cases we kind of ran into a little bit later is that right now, as you've showed us, like you're showing us vulnerabilities that were analyzed by humans. You know, CVSS, CWE, all of those things were deeply analyzed in, and that's kind of new to me, but it's awesome, like even in the context of a particular customer. However, on the other side of the spectrum, we've been also thinking about use cases where, for example, you have like an open source fuzzing engine that kind of spits out like hundreds of vulnerabilities. And, yeah, so that was going to be my question. If like you have any infrastructure where this information would be published automatically for others to consume, or does it also funnel to like this human powered analysis engine for like every little vulnerability?
The boggle with the fuzz, like there was a string about 4 years ago where we had a bunch of academic researchers that were fuzzing, saying that they found the biggest problems ever, and they were just kind of denial of service stuff. The fuzzers we have to take with a grain of salt. There is value, and that's a technique you can take as part of your supply chain to test things, to doing that input kind of validation and boundary testing. But from our standpoint, we don't get handed a lot of fuzzing reports. And when we do, we try to encourage the researcher to go back and review their own data. I'm not going to digest a 3,000-page report for them. And if they feel that there are some issues that are relevant and actually do bubble up to the level of a vulnerability, not just an annoyance, then we will work with them to help coach them through that. I get more on the flip side, where I get a lot of commercial scanners where a customer will use a Qualys or some other tool, and they will hand me a 500-page report saying, I found all these CVEs. And because we use backporting as a technique to pull the fixes into our code base, and scanners typically just work off of a version string. This is the version of the package. There's always mismatches. So I spend a lot of time talking about false positives in the code base because either we did not backport that piece of vulnerable code yet, or it was already fixed in a different release, and we added a .01 to the end of our kernel package to show we're a slightly different version, but it's that same base of code. But sharing data, again, is a solved problem for us. OVAL is the defined commercial standard that we use. We publish both things that are vulnerable that have fixes, but also things that are not fixed yet in our OVAL feed. And that has been kind of adopted from scanners and customers and open source tools like OpenSCAP. I'm sorry, Giles.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say, and then we have companies like Sun Microsystems used to do, which doesn't change the version number, just patches the binary and tells you it's fixed. And when you do a version scan or version string scan, you think there's all kinds of errors, but it's been fixed. I don't know if people still do that, but at the time, it was really a pain in the butt. So
I agree.
At least you change a tiny version number at the end. At least there's somebody can think, or some scanner can say, this isn't what I was expecting, so.
Yeah, we have a change log that says, with this patch, we address these CVEs and these defects. And so
that's a change log, but when somebody scans the software itself, they don't, they don't scan the change log.
Correct, but in our OVAL feed, we say, this advisory corrected these CVEs, and here's links to get more information about what that is.
But I understand that you likely publish this, not the RPM with the same version release, but you always increase versions or the release build, so it can be directly one-to-one associated with the fixed CVEs via this OVAL feed or CVF feeds.
Yes, exactly, Marcus.
So one of the problems we have in, can you hear me, I guess?
Yes.
Yes. So one of the problems we have in Arch Linux is that sometimes we get a CVE either on OSS security, or we found the CVE somewhere on Twitter, example. Usually there's sometimes hard to find which patch upstream which corresponds to the fixed CVE. So I'm a little bit curious how you handle that metadata. Do you handle it? Would it be possible to figure out if it's could be easier to contribute sort of patch information and get that easily tied together?
That is something I would need to get somebody from we have an internal DevOps team just for product security. Mm-hmm. I'd have to get those gentlemen on the call sometime, and maybe we can do that for a future call, and they can explain how their assembler tool works and kind of what criteria it's looking at. But yeah, it takes a lot of time. You know, looking at 400,000 things isn't easy, and we do a lot of automation as much as we can. But then at the end of the day, it really boils down to we have a real person trying to analyze this stuff once the computer's done its work.
Yeah, because one of that's probably one of the things I think a lot of at least the distributions do again is find a patch for the CV, find a patch, and often that's not committed to either Mitra or NVD. And I think that's one of the larger pain points, at least, which people will like repeat often. Yeah.
So I'd have to look. So you're basically saying when we do our advisory, we would link to like an upstream commit?
We do that in Arch Linux, at least. We try always to include the fixed commit into the metadata so we know which commit usually fixes it. Sometimes it's hard because one commit partially fixes it, but it's usually better than to just read the commit log again and have to guess.
I would have to look at exactly what we're publishing, if we do that or not. I am not personally aware right now if we do that. I'd have to go see.
So, I mean, I troll your Bugzilla a lot still, Chris, and obviously shocked, right?
In every other company.
Yeah, right. The bugs often contain the link, but none of the metadata Red Hat publishes has it. So when I need it, I just go to the bug, and I'd say 90% of the time it's there.
Cool. Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, so I think that Mitra usually includes links to patches, commits, and so. And I think if it's missing there, that something that on one hand we couldn't push the researcher or the requester to do better. So and actually everyone can adjust CVEs to add more references. It's just a pain in the ass to do so, but it's possible. But that would be one topic to discuss, if we can enhance this in a more easier form, like without doing pull requests or web forms or whatever.
I have a curious question. I'm just curious if either of you presented had do any sort of tracking or understanding of like how long it takes to go and like make people aware of a patch that's available.
Like how quickly customers adopt it?
Yeah, like it's like the end-to-end process. Curious.
So fun fact: most people that use open source are very much opposed to being tracked. You might not have noticed that. But yes, we with recent versions of our portfolio, we have some tooling that we are now able to get some of that insight if the customer agrees to let us watch. And that's something I could take a look and see kind of what the standard uptake on some of this stuff is. But my customer base is large commercial or government or retail, finance. So they tend to be heavily regulated. So they will both patch probably more frequently than some other customers, but they also will probably do it kind of bursty, where they will have a monthly or quarterly patch cadence unless there's a real critical thing to do. But yeah, I can do some research and see what I have, and if we can make some kind of extrapolations of that data.
Or even like how soon they could patch, like when you make it visible to them, I think is also kind of interesting.
And I, again, have a whole spectrum of people. I have the second an advisory comes out or just a notice, public notice, I have customers asking, when's the patch coming? And they will apply immediately because they have certain harsh government or regulatory requirements. But then I will have people at the other end that you're still, 4 or 5 years later, they may or may not patch. It just really kind of depends on what vertical the group is. And then if they have, if they have outsourced their support to a third party, generally those organizations are incented in the contract to patch more quickly. So you'll see those folks churn through stuff quickly.
So in the Arch Linux side of things, we're sort of in the other end of everything. So we're not enterprise. We don't have enterprise customers. We're usually like most target users. When there's been a fixed version, we usually regard it as solved if it's been longer than 2 weeks, because it's just easier. But the second either a released version is published or there's a patch published, which we can apply, we can usually publish within the day and have it available for users. How long it takes people to update, we have no clue, but I'd guess most users have updated within a few days.
That's really impressive. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a cool data point. Thanks so much. We're getting very quickly until the top of the hour. So Morten and Chris, thank you. That was those were very good conversations. Thank you so much. Is there anything that you as a group would like to talk about in our next meeting? I know I still owe everyone a discussion about like the cadence and times of those meetings. I will kick that discussion off next week. But whenever we decide to meet, like, is there a particular topic that kind of maybe was flagged somewhere over here that's relevant to you, and you would want to discuss it, or is coming from something else, like the interest of open source disclosures? Because if not, we can just continue with maybe bringing and inviting other people from other communities to share how they deal with disclosures. I think that's so far has been super educational. And one other thing that I would like to bring to the agenda is getting back to the topic of why are we here and what is it that we want to achieve. So maybe we would make a short discussion about that. I'd put it in the agenda for the next meeting.
Yeah, please do, because I think that's very important.
Yeah,
and I know that the OpenSSF wants to do some releases at the end of October. I doubt very much this group will be able to do release of any results at that point, but I think they very much would like to see some things at some point.
Yeah, and to get anywhere, I think like redoing the exercise of what's our focus, what is it that we want to solve, and like putting some sort of roadmap together would be the good next step. Alrighty. So once again, thank you so much for coming. Once again, welcome to our new working group team members. And I'm going to stop the recording in just a second, and I'm going to upload it to YouTube as soon as it's available. And I will post the meeting notes on GitHub. And thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, everybody.